We have Congressman Arrington on line one. We're going to jump right over there. Congressman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Matt. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning, Congressman Rob Snyder here as well with Matt today.
Hey, Ralph.
Hey.
Happy Thanksgiving, belated.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family as well.
So this has been big on the news, the CFPB pick by Donald Trump. Do you know anything that's going on with that?
I mean, what I know is that Dodd-Frank has cost $30+ billion to our economy, and the CFPB, which is the worst part of Dodd-Frank, it's a newly created edifice of the federal government, and the problem with it, other than it's just in a big expansion of the government, is that it's unaccountable. It's the most unconstitutional, basically found by a federal court to be unconstitutional, because it doesn't answer to anyone. It doesn't answer to an appropriator. It doesn't answer to an oversight committee in Congress or the President of the United States. So it's just tucked away in the Federal Reserve to wreak havoc, which it has done on many industries, the automobile industry, in terms of auto dealers, anybody. That the tentacles are endless in terms of touching sectors of our economy. But it's decimated our community banks. And they're already consumer protection. I worked at the FDIC as chief of staff. There are already consumer protection laws and enforcement mechanisms within banking agencies. It's duplicative. It's unconstitutional. It's unaccountable. I want to abolish it. But the fact that Kodry thinks he can just appoint his successor is ridiculous. And that's the president's job. And I think he's doing well to have Mulvaney over there. And we need to defang it, at least abolish it is what we ought to do long term. I don't know that we have the vote, so we should at least defang it. Make it enforcement. Don't make it rulemaking. Otherwise, you're going to continue to crush the ability for consumers to get credit and to have relationship banking, which is what we have in West Texas.
And for those that don't know the acronym of CFPB, that's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Congressman Arrington, would you be willing to write a bill to abolish the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I defended in the Budget Committee the abolishment of this bureau in our budget. So we effectively abolish it in our budget. And the committee chairwoman asked me to speak on that when the Democrats were trying to pull that out of the budget. And I used the words, this is a constitutional abomination. It ought to be abolished. And I went up against my good friend Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat, and we introduced term limits legislation together. So, yeah, absolutely. And I voted to repeal and significantly reduce the effects of Dodd-Frank, which was legislation that we passed the House. It's not going to pass the Senate because it needs 60 votes. We won't get 10 Democrats. We won't get 5 Democrats to repeal Dodd-Frank. There'll be different parts of Dodd-Frank that will be reformed. I think this is one of them, by the way. They won't repeal it, but I think you can get Democrats to acknowledge it's unaccountable, and we've got to have an ability to provide oversight like we do on everything else. So, but yes, the answer is absolutely.
Just for the sake of argument, say CFPB goes away within the next year or so, do you think that would also provide the impetus to ratchet back some of the other multi-letter agencies with the government, particularly the EPA? I mean, you bring up enforcement rather than creating rules out of thin air. I mean, the EPA is one of the worst organizations in the federal government that does that.
You're absolutely right. The EPA has been the worst perpetrator of regulatory activism. We saw that over the last 8 years of the Obama administration. By the way, I'm not for regulatory activism for any president, Republican or Democrat. It's I believe in Article 1 that the powers of legislating belong to Congress. But, yeah, I mean, one of them was they said that all of a sudden overnight with a magic wand over there at EPA that through the waters of the U.S. laws that the federal government has jurisdiction. At one point it was for navigable waters, and then they waved the magic wand and said, and non-navigable waters, which means ponds, puddles, and ditches on our private property for farmers and ranchers and other property owners. So Yeah, I think what you're seeing though, and look, we've signed a bunch of bills in the House to rein in and significantly reduce these acronyms that most people don't understand, but EPA, CFPB, a lot of these appendages of the federal government. But you'll see President Trump has done the most in rolling these regulations back and reining in the fourth branch of government in these regulatory actions.
Okay. Congressman, we're going to take a break right quick, and we'll be right back.
News Talk 95.1, 790 KFYO, Rob Snyder, Matt Martin.
Okay, this is News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. We are speaking with Congressman Jodey Arrington, and he's on the phone right now. Congressman, they were talking about you being on a debt ceiling task force. Could you talk a little bit about that, what y'all kind of expect to get out of that?
You bet. The speaker identified some budget hawks, and I was glad that with my time on the budget committee and our decision to cut $200 billion out of mandatory spending, which was the most we've cut in 20 years. Of course, the Senate is another story, but he put us on this committee, and I say us because I represent West Texas, and I think the view of West Texans is that the federal government is spending way too much of their money, and the national debt is probably the greatest threat to the future of our country at $20 trillion and counting. So here's the thing. We've had this debt ceiling issue for 70 years. Has it worked as a way to stop and pause and reflect on the debt we're amassing and putting fiscal restraint measures in place? The answer is not really. In 70 years, there may have been 2 or 3 examples I could point to where they did that. Our job now is to give recommendations to the House in a way that's going to actually rein in the spending, because we haven't seen that in years.
Yeah. So, do you have any ideas maybe that might work to do that as you're getting into the task force? Any ideas that have been thrown around?
Well, yeah. I mean, let me give you a few examples. One is if we do major spending like this emergency spending we're doing for the hurricane relief, it'll be upwards of $100 billion, maybe upwards of $150 billion. That we should find offsets. We should not pass those without offsetting them. That's one. The one I'm working on that I've already discussed with the committee, and that this week I should be discussing with Speaker Ryan and others, is we should have targets. We should go from GDP as a nominal value. Debt as a nominal value, and say, what's our debt per GDP? Right now it's a little over 70%. Let's have targets that walk it back. And if we miss that target, then the president submits a plan to reduce our spending. If we don't like it, we come up with our own spending plan. If we can't pass it, then we cut across the board, save and except military, including mandatory spending, to reduce the spending and the amount to get us under that target. And the targets would walk it back to a healthy, I think we've had an average since World War II of about 40 to 45% debt to GDP. Right now we're well over 70%. So that's an idea that I put forward. I think if we don't put measures on ourselves that force us to cut, I just don't see the will in the United States Congress to do it, which is my biggest disappointment since I've been in Congress.
Okay, Congressman, you brought up something that reminded me of a question. You were talking about how the money that they were trying to get together for what happened in Houston, the flooding there.
Yeah.
Now the governor's talking about that there's just y'all aren't putting together enough. Is this something that the United States can do to help Texas more as far as that's concerned? And then also, Texas has a savings account. Is this something that they're planning on sucking all that away, or what are they trying to do with that?
Well, the governor has come up here and has presented his plan to us and to other members and to the White House. And it calls for significant amounts of money, tens of billions of dollars. I don't doubt that Texas needs it, and the folks living in the disaster area especially need the money. But there should be some healthy skin in the game from the states. It's just a small match. That will not raid the rainy day fund. It will just provide, I think, a healthy responsibility and sort of partnership with the states. But the idea is, for me, is not that we don't give money to the states who need it, but that we require an offset in our spending in other places in the federal government. So that's what hasn't happened. I went ahead and supported the emergency funding because because I'm not going to play politics with people's lives. But long term, when we talk about the longer term rebuilding efforts, that I'm going to expect that we have some offsets or some measure of fiscal restraint, because that's the way the American people and the way our businesses in West Texas have to operate. It's the way the federal government should operate.
Yeah. Congressman, we're going to have to take one more break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
This is News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. It's 7:52. 43 degrees here at News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. Let's go right back to the phones with Congressman Arrington.
Congressman, a federal judge this week is going to take a look at the AT&T-Time Warner proposed merger. Do you have any thoughts about that as far as how it could shape the telecommunications industry?
Well, I think they should look at it just like, the Monsanto bear crop and other conglomerations consolidating assets in an industry that already has just too few players competing for consumer businesses. I mean, I think it's a legitimate deal in the sense that that's what happens. You see it in big pharma, you see it in other industries, but in communications as well. The antitrust will apply, and that's what they're going to look at and review, which is appropriate. And like I said, they do that in other industries, as long as this isn't a breach of antitrust where they can monopolize and gouge, and the consumers get a bad deal because of monopolization of a market. That's fine, but I'm not the arbiter of that. I just think it's appropriate for these reviews to take place.
Okay, and one other thing that's in the news right now is net neutrality. What exactly is the downside to the net neutrality laws that are rules that had been put in place versus what Donald Trump's trying to pull back?
Well, I think that we have this market space which is unencumbered by the regulatory morass that we see in the broader marketplace that we're trying to unwind. And we all believe in the free enterprise system, and it only works when you don't put so much burden on the businesses and cost that's passed to the consumer. And we're just seeing a real beatdown in other markets. This is one area where you've got a true free market, and I think that it's appropriate to keep it that way. This FTC and other sort of unfair and deceptive trade practices still apply. I just think you've got one group that wants to regulate and another group that wants to keep it as a free enterprise system. However, there is the issue of privacy, and I'm going to fall on the side of consumers being able to decide if they want their information bartered and traded in the marketplace from Google and Facebook, edge information providers, as well as the big communications companies. So that piece, I take a different position.
All right. Well, Congressman, we want to thank you for calling in, and we'll see you here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Again, God bless, and go West Texas.
Thank you, Congressman Arrington. Coming up on 8 o'clock, News Talk 95.1, 790 KFYO. Rob Snyder, Matt Martin, here with you until 8:30. Chad Hasty Show coming up today at 8:30. We're going to check in news and weather next. News Talk 95.1, 790 KFYO.